Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and this is episode 282. This is our final episode in our 31-week deep dive into the Bible difficulties of the book of Numbers. Today, we land on Numbers 35:30 and a question that cuts right to the heart of justice. Does the need for two witnesses mean that it's wrong to condemn someone on other evidence? Let me start with a couple of questions to get us thinking. Have you ever wondered how a justice system could work if almost every serious crime had to be seen by two people standing right there watching? If that were true, detectives might as well pack up and go home. Unless two people happen to be standing in the room saying, "Yep, we saw the whole thing," justice would come to a screeching halt. And if God's law really required that, would most murderers simply walk free? Those are fair questions. Let's give them the weight they deserve. According to the Big Book of Bible Difficulties by Norman Geisler and Thomas Howe, the problem is stated this way. According to Numbers 35:30, a man accused of murder could be convicted and condemned on the testimony of two witnesses, but not on the testimony of only one witness. However, the great majority of crimes are not committed in the open for people to witness. Does this make it wrong to convict and condemn someone on the basis of other evidence when there have been no eyewitnesses? And that's the difficulty in a nutshell. Let's steelman the skeptical concern so we treat it fairly. A critic can reasonably argue something like this. Most murders do not happen in public with multiple people watching. Killings often occur in private, at night, or between people who know each other. If Numbers 35:30 truly demands two actual eyewitnesses who personally observed the act, then the vast majority of real-world murderers would walk free. That would make God's justice system largely unworkable. It would also create a moral tension, because the same law that places such a high value on human life would end up unable to protect that life in most actual cases. In short, the safeguard against false conviction becomes so strict that it effectively protects the guilty more than the victims. That's the strongest form of the objection. So how do we answer it? Let's look carefully at the text. Numbers 35:30 in the New Living Translation reads, "All murderers must be put to death, but only if evidence is presented by more than one witness. No one may be put to death on the testimony of only one witness." The same high standard appears in Deuteronomy 17:6 and Deuteronomy 19:15. The clear concern is preventing conviction, especially execution, on the word of a single, potentially false or mistaken, accuser. But notice something important. As Geisler and Howe point out, the issue is not whether every witness personally watched the murder take place. The Hebrew word translated witness is aid, and it is broader than our modern English idea of pure eyewitness. We sometimes picture a witness as someone sitting in the front row with binoculars and a notebook, watching every second unfold. But that's not how the Hebrew word is used throughout the Old Testament. In fact, the short answer is no. God's law never required that every murderer be seen by two eyewitnesses. Now, let's see why. Leviticus 5:1 uses the exact same word and demonstrates its range. In the New Living Translation, it says, "If you are called to testify about something you have seen or that you know about, it is sinful to refuse to testify." Here, a witness includes both someone who actually saw an event and someone who possesses reliable knowledge about it. So, according to the Mosaic Law, there were two types of witnesses who could offer testimony regarding guilt. One was an eyewitness. The other was someone who, though not an eyewitness, could provide reliable testimony identifying the offender or establishing important facts surrounding the crime. The principle is corroboration, facts established by more than one independent source, not a rigid rule that only those who literally watch the act may testify. Think of it like building a bridge. You don't trust an entire bridge to a single support. The more independent supports you have, the greater your confidence the bridge will hold. That's the idea behind corroborating evidence. As Geisler and Howe conclude, Numbers 35:30 does not forbid convictions based on evidence other than direct eyewitness testimony. Of course, Moses wasn't thinking about fingerprints, DNA, surveillance cameras, or Ring doorbells. Those technologies were thousands of years away. The law addresses the evidence available in its own day while establishing a timeless principle. Before a person's life is taken, guilt must be firmly corroborated. David Guzik makes this same observation in his enduring word commentary on Numbers 35. He notes that the law deliberately places the burden on the prosecution rather than the accused. Before the death penalty could ever be carried out, guilt had to be established by more than the accusation of a single individual. That emphasis wasn't weakness, it was protection against irreversible injustice. Precept Austin reaches a similar conclusion while emphasizing Israel's legal tradition. The commentary notes that the requirement for multiple witnesses became the consistent standard for establishing willful murder, reinforcing that capital punishment demanded the highest possible level of certainty before a sentence could be carried out. We also see that the Torah itself knows how to handle situations where no human eyewitnesses are present. In his article, Witnesses in the Wilderness, the Biblical Law of Evidence and the Case of Unseen Transgression, Edward D. Andrews examines cases such as the assault of an engaged woman in a field in Deuteronomy 22. There, the law doesn't insist on two people who literally watched the assault. Instead, it evaluates the totality of the evidence, the location, the circumstances, her cries for help, and the fact that no one was present to rescue her. Andrews argues that this demonstrates the Mosaic Law was never intended to ignore compelling evidence simply because no eyewitnesses happened to be standing nearby. Why did God establish such a high standard in the first place? Because He places enormous value on human life. Genesis 9:6 and Numbers 35:33-34 make that clear. Shedding innocent blood pollutes the land. False testimony that leads to an execution is itself a grave evil. Requiring multiple witnesses or equivalent corroborating evidence was a deliberate safeguard against hasty, careless, or malicious judgments, while still allowing justice to be carried out when guilt could be firmly established. GotQuestions.org reaches the same conclusion in its article, Why Are Two or Three Witnesses Needed in Deuteronomy 17:6 and 19:15. The requirement was never intended to make justice impossible. Rather, it protected society from false accusations by ensuring that serious charges were established rather than merely alleged. God understood something about human nature that hasn't changed in the last 3,500 years. People can lie, people can be mistaken, and sometimes people honestly remember the same event very differently. So, let's answer today's question directly. No. Numbers 35:30 does not teach that it is wrong to condemn someone on other forms of evidence. It teaches that capital cases require corroborated evidence. One person's accusation alone is never enough to take a human life. That is not a flaw in God's justice system. It's one of its greatest strengths. The principle still speaks today. Truth matters because lives matter. And when someone's life is on the line, I think so isn't good enough. Human life is too valuable to risk on thin, emotional, or unconfirmed claims. And God's Word, when we take the time to understand its language and context, proves itself both wise and remarkably practical. Over these last 31 weeks in the book of Numbers, we've seen that the Bible's so-called contradictions and difficulties disappear, not because we explain them away, but because we slow down long enough to read the text in its historical, literary, and linguistic context. Time after time, what first looks like a problem turns into evidence of the Bible's remarkable coherence. That's good news for every one of us. If today's episode helped strengthen your confidence in God's Word, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com, join the discussion on Facebook, or support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Lance Smith. You can also find every episode at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com. Next Friday, we begin our 35-week journey through the book of Deuteronomy as we look at Deuteronomy 1:1 and ask, how can Moses have written this when biblical criticism claims it was written many centuries later? This is one of the skeptics' favorite opening objections to Deuteronomy, so it should be a fascinating place to begin. Until then, I'm Lance Smith, wishing you good health, good study, and God's richest blessings. So long, everybody.